Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 11 of the Jankyard, a podcast about Ashes Reborn, a game from Plaid Hat Games. And today, for all you listeners, we have, I guess, some sad news or happy news, depending on how you look at it, but it's just two of us. Killercactus is in the busiest time of his work season, so it's just going to be the Schman, the Schmith, the Schlegend, Schmendrix.
That's true. I do have a KC sock puppet here, which I will break out when necessary. Do you want to hear a preview?
Now you've got me. You got my attention.
All right, here we go. Well, I think you're both wrong, but more Schmendrix is wrong, and here's why. That's what you'll hear occasionally when KC pipes in.
That sounds perfect. That's very accurate.
Yeah.
And myself, the treatment. So we've hopefully got a lot to cover because it's been a minute since we recorded the last episode. And we'll jump right into the news because a lot's sort of happened since we recorded last. So first of all, the Waves Open finished, and it was a really great final. I think it was just between Tuxedo on Hope Creepers and Brankus on JK's Brennan Burn. I watched the match, we commentated on it. It was very exciting, and ultimately Tuxedo came out ahead for the win. So that was really cool. Did you get a chance to watch it?
I did. It was a great game. Really back and forth. At least initially, I wasn't sure who was going to come out on top. If I'd had to place a bet, I'm not a betting man, but had I, and were I to be one, I think I would have bet on Tuxedo. I think there's a pretty decent chance Tuxedo has played against Brankus's deck more than Brankus has actually played it, given that I think he is, well, I know he's JK's brother, and he's one of JK's main testing partners, so I'm sure he's tested against that deck quite a lot, and knows it pretty well inside and out, and has probably heard JK talk a lot about it. So Brankus made a super impressive run, but yeah, I think Tuxedo knows that deck inside and out, and probably had pretty well-developed lines for his own Hope Creepers against it.
Yeah, he's also got a lot of reps against his regular playing partner, Tuxedo Bot, and so that makes sense. But I think, and you know, like obviously, like I said, it was a great game. I think there were, and I don't remember exactly which round or anything, but Brankus made a couple slip-ups. I believe, you know, we commented on that, whether it was, I think it was myself, Flora, and Ninja. We had sort of noticed them during the game, but afterwards, Brankus had revealed on Discord that he had a Law of Fear, and I think that playing that would have been a big difference in the last round, because he just needed to slow the game down enough to sort of get the last burn done. And I also, Law of Fear, for those of you who play it rarely, it also exhausts, I believe, or destroys. See, now I don't even know. Exhausts or destroys a 0 attack unit, which means it can handle creepers.
Exhausts.
Handle the seedling. So that would have been a really key point. But I mean, like you said, he played really well. But I think it was one of those games that was more about who was going to make the first mistake rather than, you know, just the luck of the dice or the luck of the draw. So anyway, so that was a great game.
And I think further cemented the impression that up until the release of the new cards, we are in a Hope Creepers Brennan Burn meta. And at least that time, Hope Creepers came out on top.
I'm going to touch on that when we talk about the new cards. But yeah, that was basically the meta game that everyone wanted to see. And so then there was a little bit of a lull.
Did we want it, or did we just expect we were going to see it?
Well,
I guess we wanted it.
We wanted to see it. We like it. I think it cements the assumptions and sort of the common. I don't want to say common knowledge, but the common thread of discussion. It was like finally like here is the defining matchup. You had the two decks that we've talked about on this podcast and on Discord for the last 6 months, and it was all the more impressive to see Tuxedo bring sort of the definitive list that we had talked about, and then Brankus playing as a rookie playing JK's list, and those being the final. I think it was what we wanted to see so that we could prove to ourselves we knew what we were talking about, and also hopefully prove that there is an issue that needs to be dealt with from either a new card perspective or an errata perspective. Anyway, so we'll touch on that in a bit, but there was a little bit of a break, and now we're getting back into some more tournaments that are popping up. So there's currently 2 that have been announced. One is a webcam tournament league that is being hosted or administered by Flora. And this is an effort to try and get some of the people from the Team Covenant server over, because a lot of them prefer playing with physical cards. So the registration is currently open, and it will close April 13th. And then deck lists and pods will be announced the next day. And then we also have the Phoenix League pod, which is being organized by Impossible German. And this is a closed list tournament. So we will not have any reveals of the deck lists, but we will have pods revealed, and that closes on the 23rd. So as of recording, which is the 19th, that means in 4 days, you have to register and message your deck list to Impossible German, and then the pods will be revealed the next day. So that's going to be exciting. A lot more games to be played, and because we have the new cards, we're going to see how those flush out. So first, actually, before we get into that, I just have to do 2 things. One, particle shield. So I'm just announcing that so that if Charlotte started dozing off in the first half, she's back to paying attention.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't say anything insulting about that card. We'll lose our only listener.
Yeah, no. And Dune Imperium, I know it's an unrelated game, but again, this is specifically to make sure that Chaos Theory is actually paying attention to what we say.
Oh, no, Chaos Theory definitely doesn't listen to this podcast. But
he will now.
That was a nice try.
Yeah.
Dune Imperium, vastly overrated. Come at me in the comments, Chaos Theory.
There you go.
I mean, why stop at one mechanical system when you can pack in 5 or 6 in a single game?
We don't want like downvotes or people slamming us. All right, let's just get the attention and stick to a positive route.
All right, fair.
New cards. I'm gonna let you take this because I have had a busy week and I've played very little with them, and I haven't really watched all that many games. And I know that you've been slacking off all week playing game after game during the week. So let's hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts? What's going on? What's hot? What were we right about? What were we wrong about?
Yeah, so the new cards, with many, many thanks to Dijon, are all implemented on Ashteki, which is fantastic. And to put in context, I've played a few games. So I can't say, I'm not going to say anything definitive. I've watched the conversation as well in the Discord, but I think it's so far, I think one really impactful card, which I thought was going to be impactful, but you felt differently, was Chant of Transfusion. So I think some of the competitive players who are very tuned into value are, like, for example, Brian B., Redentor, have quickly picked up on this card and are using it pretty aggressively. I think it's got a couple of really powerful synergies. One is with Phoenix Attendant, which is in set, which we guessed it might be nice to pair with. Phoenix Attendant with a side action can move a wound from your Phoenixborn to the Attendant, healing one wound essentially. And then Chant of Transfusion can be triggered with a main, so you could immediately transfer that wound onto another unit your opponent controls, setting the Attendant up to heal you again on the next turn. So that's powerful. The other one that I think has the potential to be downright oppressive is Blood Archer plus Chant of Transfusion. So that's one where if you can get a couple of chants up, I mean, even with one, what you're essentially doing is side action, shooting with the Blood Archer, triggering its effect, which puts a damage on the Blood Archer to put a damage on another target unit, and then main action, moving that new wound off the Blood Archer onto another unit. And once your opponent has a couple of chants down and a Blood Archer, if you don't have hard removal of your own, it's going to be a very long day at the office, or maybe a short day at the office, depending. It can just be extremely difficult to get units to stick. And this is where I think some of the features of Chant of Transfusion that we talked about a little bit start to come in, which is that I think there are very few natural counters to Chant of Transfusion. So the go-to in the face of damage-based removal, like Ping Fester, for example, where you need to put the damage on with a side action to make that work as effectively as you'd want, has always been Root Armor. And Chant of Transfusion just does not care about Root Armor because it's moving wounds, it's not dealing damage, so it avoids armor entirely. And the other thing it really handles well is at least the Snapper part of Salsa Napper or Value Town. It's really nasty against Snappers because it's moving a wound and not dealing a damage, it ignores the status token ability on Seafoam Snapper. So it is... So you can't use Root Armor against it. And so then the questions are, what do you actually do against it? And I have actually seen folks talking about Seal in the Discord, and I saw Carl in one game. He's been working on a Tristan list. He was playing a game with open hands. He didn't play it because his opponent, I don't think, was running Chant of Transfusion this game. But he actually had Seal in his hand. So important enough that Carl's actually testing it. So, and Carl Diaz being one of the premier, if not the premier, competitive players in the game. So I think Chant of Transfusion, at least in these very early days of a pretty unsettled meta, seems like it has the potential to really stick. I think Phoenix Attendant is in part supported by Chant of Transfusion, but I think even without it, given that it's a beefy unit that's hard to remove, provides some healing, I think that has some real possibility. Killercactus, who's not here, was running a Xander deck, I believe, it was an Auric. He was running Phoenix Attendant with 3x Chant of Transfusion, 3x Drain Vitality, which also, for a steeper dice cost, although you don't need to you don't need an ally to be dead, can move units. Move wounds, with main actions, was basically keeping a Phoenix Attendant.
And heal, right?
Yeah. He may have had mass heal. I don't know that he had heal. I'm not sure. But in any case, I mean, he was just keeping this Phoenix Attendant alive forever, throwing wounds at his opponent. He'd healed 11 at one point and played like 80 minutes, he said, and, had to quit because his lunch break was well over at that point. But it can get quite oppressive. And I think that Phoenix Attendant, I think you don't have to invest as heavily in it as that by any means to have it make a potentially important impact on the viability of burn decks, because it really can be a difficult unit for burn decks to remove while also still pushing sufficient burn through to hit your opponent. It's just a 2-dice unit. It's only one ceremonial class, so it's also just has the potential to be omnipresent. I mean, you could run it with a single ceremonial die if you want to. So
it's also 4 life, which is surprisingly difficult, especially if you're doing something where you're still playing efficient small units like Sally, Snapper. It's hard to get rid of when backed up by Chant of Transfusion, which acts as the small sack string mage combo, just with a different sort of cost trigger.
Yeah. I say all that because, like I said, I think it's very early days in the meta. I think my general impressions, here are my hypotheses. I think there are a lot of decks that rely on burn to close. I think may struggle to close with Phoenix Attendant. I'm not going to say confidently that this makes the classic Brennan Burn deck unviable. I think it'd be way too premature to say that, and I'm not sure it produces enough healing consistently enough to accomplish that, especially because the way I think that Brennan Burn is headed is providing control tools to keep the counter swings in check. So I would be surprised if it accomplished that. But I do think they're mid-rangey burn decks or burn decks that want to use burn to close for reach that I think may struggle. And I think Chant of Transfusion is just going to be... I think it's pretty miserable for a wide range of swing decks, especially mid-range swing decks. If someone's running Chant of Transfusion and Blood Archer or Chant of Transfusion and Old Salt, like those decks' ability to chew through 2 health units and then also bypass Root Armor to fester Knights away is, I think, pretty challenging for a lot of swing decks. So I guess you can guess where that leads you into.
Yeah.
But in any case,
I mean, so like I said, I haven't really played with the new cards that much. I did modify one of my decks to slot in Old Salt, just because it was running Ceremonial, and I don't see a reason not to for a 3-life body with a ping. And I also did a version of my Odette list with Bone Crow, which is one of the Phoenixborn that I think it sort of fits in the best.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually, we played against each other. And unfortunately, I guess I first fived fairly strong, and the game didn't go past round 1. But it was... Yeah,
I made a pretty...
It was just more of a case of like...
big player.
I don't know if the card... I don't know if the card is strong, but you had been starting Phoenix Attendant, and I just sort of had the right counters. But I wasn't playing anything efficient, and I think that's the only reason that I was able to stick in, because if you had gotten the engine up, then, like you said, it's brutal against 1-life and 2-lifers, and every game I've watched has had Chant of Transfusion, which, like, it doesn't matter what the Phoenixborn is, whether it's a 3-spell board, which is not something you typically see in the game, people running utility spells in a 3-spell board Phoenixborn. So it just kind of shows the mindset right now of people, at the very least, testing. And then even one of the cool decks that I've seen is Brian playing a mono ceremonial James deck, and that's just cool to show.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, it's cool. He posted it, but it's just really neat to show the impact of ceremonial now. Like the fact that he feels it's viable, that he's playing that type of deck, and then he's had, I think he said it was at the time he posted it, like 7-0, and that's basically opening up Ritualist to get double chance, and then using James's ability to pull out whatever you need, whether it's puppeteers or otherwise. So it's just it's a cool deck, and it's cool to see that a mono ceremonial deck, which has previously been a weaker color, now is seeing play and is just seeing strength. So I'm excited as far as like future mono decks come out, how they're going to define, I guess, the image and the play style of each of the colors more, because I know that that's something where we haven't really been in a meta for almost like over a year now, everybody's running at least 2, 3, 4 colors, and it'll be cool to see a reduction in wide spreads.
Agreed. I think that is really interesting. It has all sorts of knock-on effects. I mean, I think it's interesting that we're seeing both these the mono color decks, mono ceremonial being the first, but also some of the strongest cards in those decks not requiring more than a single ceremonial if you want to splash one in, like Old Salt and Phoenix Attendant, for example. I mean, I think Old Salt, we should just say, like, everybody expected it to be ubiquitous. It's ubiquitous. It's a really strong unit. It's going to be around for a really long time. I don't know that anything will displace that from ceremonial anytime soon.
There's virtually no reason not to run it. Like, with Anchornaut, it was easy to make it like the 31st cut type of thing, where you're like, it gives a ping and it's a basic cost, but it's also only a defensive unit and it's easily pinged away. But then Old Salt takes that up the ante. It gives 2 attack, it gives 3 health, which, is the sort of right middle ground to handle a lot of small stuff, and a ping, and it synergizes with the rest of the cards. There's no reason you shouldn't have a ceremonial just to splash that card.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only reason would be that you've found some other synergy that's significant enough, because in and of itself, yeah, there's a lot of value, but it's not necessarily getting you plus value that you could get from something super synergistic. So I could see situations where it gets displaced by something else, but I tend to agree that if you're just looking for single ally value, I don't know that you could do better than that.
So you mentioned something, and so my hot take this week, which even Brian was like, oh, that seems like it's a very hot take, was that ultimately, everyone plays with the new stuff every time it comes out. And so it's the new hotness, everyone's testing, everyone's pushing the limits, yada, yada. And some of those cards are naturally good, and I expect, as with every set, at least, sort of 3 or 4 of them are going to be a permanent mainstay in decks. But I don't think that any of these cards will actually change the meta. And by the meta, I'm specifically talking about Brand and Burn and Hope Creepers. So that was my hot take. And the only way I think that will change is with errata. So what are your thoughts on whether this actually addresses any of the, the current decks, the top decks?
I think I'm much less confident than you that this will have no meta impacts. I think on the face of it, I don't think it has, in and of itself, probably any impact on Hope Creepers, although I could be wrong. I think Hope Creepers is quite resilient in the long game. If part of what these cards are doing, in a combination of providing higher volume, cheaper removal via Chant of Transfusion, along with Old Salt and along with healing in the form of Phoenix Attendant, then that on paper doesn't naturally counter Hope Creepers super well. Obviously, all removal is good removal, and Hope Creepers could struggle with that, but they are so efficient in what they are trying to do, and it's not obvious to me that solves that problem. I do think I think the way in which it changes the meta, or these new cards change the meta, is if they unlock the deck that we were talking about a few episodes ago with Killer, that has the capacity to blunt Brennan enough with healing that they can't push through, and then counters Hope Creepers with other cards. And the reason I think that might be possible is simply because of how few cards I think it would take to, with Phoenix 10 being the core one, Like, for Xander, Phoenix Attendant by itself might be enough to give you, 4 health over the course of the game, which with Xander's 20 health life pool, and if you're using the rest of your cards to go fast enough against Brennan, that could be enough. I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to say, obviously, but I think if the way it changes the meta, like I said, is if Phoenix Attendant as a single healing card, with some support from Chant of Transfusion potentially, those 2 cards are not so difficult to include in a deck that you couldn't also potentially include a plan for Hope. And they keep you in Ceremonial, which is a pretty powerful color right now. It's aligned with burn options and other things that, would enable you to go fast, try to go fast against both the Hope and Brennan. It's not like pushing you into Divine and Charm, for example, which have tended to be slower colors, harder to race the Brennan and go fast enough against the Hope to prevent their value engine from turning on. So I don't know. I think it's too early to say that the current meta will resist these changes. I think there's at least some reason to believe that it might open up new possibilities. I think those new possibilities are going to be pretty grindy in a lot of matchups, which doesn't fill me with a lot of excitement and anticipation. But
yeah, I mean, the extra healing will be interesting to see. I mean, it's not even just for Brennan. Obviously, it counteracts Brennan a little bit harder because once the burn spells are gone, if you've kept up, with the healing, then ultimately you grind Brennan out of options. And again, specifically with Old Salt, I think it addresses the Huntmaster Sally, cards that typically Brennan runs a little bit better because you're getting the ping and you're also getting a body that can resist at least one attack or can resist ping on the counterattack. And I think that's a big deal. And I think that the same application of Old Salt for creepers matters because at least something I've tried is like, creepers are coming and you want to ping them off right away. And then you're worried about double down and then getting hit in the face for anywhere from 4 to 6 on the way back, especially if Hope is running like Void Pulse or just a Frog Ping. Old Salt somewhat mitigates that because it's a body that can't be just pinged away. It can still, I mean, if you really went all in with double down and duplicate on the counter swing, you're going to take 6 damage, but you're also spending, as the Hope player, 2, 4, 5 dice for 6 damage. And, the person playing Old Salt has only spent 2. And so at least you're coming out way ahead in dice. And then if you can back that up with healing to mitigate, the damage you took early, it might be something where you could hold out. The more important thing you said was like small changes. And I wonder if Old Salt, Phoenix Attendant sort of necessitate Festers and other removal being played in the deck, and what that means ultimately to the deck composition of the 2 main meta decks, and like what is cut in favor, and whether that cuts enough out to open a window, basically. Because, I mean, as we sort of covered the Brennan and Creeper decks, they're very like slim. Like they're trimmed down, all the fat's trimmed off to just do exactly what they have to do. And as soon as you start introducing problems where a card like Fester might have to be a 2 or a 3 of, that becomes very interesting to see what has to be cut in favor of that. So we'll see. I'm not confident on the other cards. Chant of Transfusion sort of aside, because I think that will be a very good card, but I'm not as sure as Calamity Golem or Infuriate or Bone
I don't
Crow.
think those cards matter.
Yeah, I don't think they address the meta problem. But yeah, we'll see. It's not going to be the first tournament or the second. It'll sort of be in a few months from now, where things have leveled out.
Yep, I think that's right. It'll be exciting to see. I mean, look, it's going to be... There are at least new problems to solve. There are new questions being asked, and that may require new answers. The answers might still be the same, but like you said, I think it is interesting to think. I don't know whether... I think if either deck is going to add Fester, it's more likely to be the Brennan, just because it's already in color, but who knows? I mean, I'm just excited that there are new questions being asked. Like, I recently went back... I think I got my shipping confirmation email for Tristan and Rowan in like mid-August. It's been a really long time since we've had new cards. Yeah. So I'm just excited for the conversation to change, even if we ultimately settle back into the same pattern. I think it's more than just... I think people are really excited by the new cards. But I'm excited at the highest levels of the game, what it'll do, how these new questions will be answered, whether they actually need to be answered.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also, like, we're just talking specifically about two cards, but we didn't even touch on the new Phoenixborn uniques. And as far as, like, one game that I played against Noah with, I think I played 2 games against Noah, and... Man, Shadowblade is as good as I thought it would be. It is, it's just brutal if you're playing any 1-lifers, or even 2-lifers, but they've been previously wounded. It comes out of nowhere on attack or defense, and it hurts. So that card is great. I haven't seen any playtime stuff, but I don't know. I'm still hopeful that that's a pretty awesome card too.
Yeah, so I think it's worth... I agree. I think we should talk about Noah, because I think Noah actually has the potential to start making top cuts now, which I think is really different than before. And that's another one where, like, what does Noah making top cuts mean for Hope Creepers? I don't know. I mean, like...
That would be great.
Is there a world in which Noah starts to actually... I think it would be really cool to see. It would be a very large meta impact if there were a couple Noah decks that started to be basically gatekeepers for Hope Creepers. I'm not saying it's possible, but you could at least imagine how that would come to pass, which is that the combination of locking down Noah's Phoenixborn ability, locking down the Creepers book round 1, and there's basically no way for Hope to avoid it. They have to give a turn to Noah once they play the book to lock it down. Plus, Shadowblade providing just such nice removal value when you need it.
Yeah, like as soon as they duplicate, right? Because like it's like the specific counter. You play Hope Creepers, or sorry, you play Hope in general, hoping that you're going to get a lot of value out of duplicating a 1-life conjuration. And then Noah either shuts the book down entirely, or he holds a Shadowblade so that as soon as you come swinging, and maybe you even Void Pulse, then he just wrecks your plan. It's like, oh, you thought you were swinging with 2 or 3 creepers or other unit? Well, actually, now they're all gone. And he draws cards so that he can then do more stuff. I think it's really interesting to see where it goes, because it could be, it could be definitely a top cut, but if not, at least a gatekeeper against some of those decks, which I don't know if as a Hope player, which I'm not, do you start thinking about Noah? Like, do you have to, even though he hasn't been played in previous tournaments all that much, do you have to be like, well, just in case I need to pack, I don't know, gates open or like, I don't know what you would do. I don't know how you play against that.
I think that's a really interesting question. And then I think on the burn side, I do think it's really interesting to ask the question as to whether or not the availability of really cheap removal in Chance of Transfusion and the old salt pings makes Jessa the premier burn deck. I mean, at the same time that Brennan is is kind of slowing down to some degree in favor of control, like with Law of Fear, Meteor. You've got Jessa not exactly speeding up, but I think what Jessa really likes is just really efficient ways of killing stuff so she can scream more. And she's gotten a bunch of new toys for that. I mean, Chant of Transfusion, dice-free death triggers for screams. It's pretty sick. So I think it's interesting. I mean, I think it's at least worth considering whether... I don't think playtime factors in probably to like...
I think it does.
A top cut deck. I could be wrong about that.
I think playtime is actually huge because, like you said, Jessa likes to slow things down, and playtime really puts a pinch on the opponent, like not just on attacking, but defending or guarding, right? You all of a sudden get a puppet, which could be, whether it's like, especially against a Hope deck, right? It starts to add clog, but then they do have to eventually kill it off, which just gives you another scream trigger. And I think it suits Jessa so perfectly that if you're already in Ceremonial, you're probably going to play Festers and Bloodchains anyway. So then the question is, well, what do I give up by dropping Fear in exchange for playtime? And I think you are basically gaining less self-destruction and evening up the battlefields by way of clogging and potentially adding on to your burn plan already, all for very cheap. Like Puppeteer is super cheap, so it's awesome.
Thank you for bringing up Noah, because I know Clue's been really excited about Noah. He's been thinking about some interesting Noah decks. I think if if you look out, just ask the question of, will the meta shake up? Let's not just say top table, like as in the top 2, but like what's making cut. I think we're going to see a vast increase from, well, I don't know. You looked through all the Shuffle Bus tournament results. Has a Noah made top cut?
Well, I mean, technically I did.
Okay. Well,
I made a top cut, but it was the summer single day. So there was only 8 of us. I was third. I placed third. There was Carl won. The Cap.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the Cap made it with his Echo deck, and the Cap and I tied on win-loss record, but he had one more blood point than I did, so I came in third. So technically, yes, but otherwise, I don't think so. It's been a while since I've looked over all the lists, and the results were not all readily available, but
yeah, I think there are more opportunities for Noah to top cut without counting on a bunch of people not showing up. Not that that's what got you into the top 3, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, sure. If I ever make a top cut, so one thing, I'm going to take it slightly sideways because we were talking just in general, like a variety of decks. But this is going back to our last episode where we had talked about floors and ceilings. And ever since we dove into
our carpentry episode,
yeah, all about design and architecture. Ever since we talked about it as like, I mean, it's not like we prepare for these conversations. A lot of it is just free flowing.
What are you talking about? I've spent all day in meditation and deep thinking.
Well, okay, fine. This is why you have so much to say and why I fumble through these things. But I was coming off the cuff for a lot of things. And I had asked you and Killer about, it's easy sort of to define the ceiling of burn and swing decks. But what does it mean to be the ceiling of a mill deck? And so then for like days, or even like now it's, I guess, been a couple weeks, I haven't stopped thinking about it. And I tried to even like math out what the ceilings were for the 3 archetypes of decks. And with burn, it's really easy because you just sort of count up all your burn spells and that, assume that you're going to get, in the case of a Brennan deck, you're going to get a spirit burn per round. And that's sort of your ceiling. And then you maybe get a couple of hits with units, but it's easy to sort of calculate roughly what your output is. And you just need to know what your target is, which is whatever Phoenixborn you're against, how much of a buffer zone you're going to have for meditations or if they decide to heal. Swing decks, sort of similar. You have your conjurations, which you can average as like, I'm going to get, or not average, since we're talking about ceiling, you say, what if I got hit with every conjuration every round and then some of my allies, and that's sort of your output. And then I was like, well, what do you do with mill? And so the way I looked at it was two things. One is obviously you have to mill out their deck. So you know that your target is always the same. Meditations from your opponent aside, it's 25 cards. And I was like, so can you do a JK style, like in the sense of like, can you try and race mill damage as fast as you could race burn, by wiping out their deck and then just going for it? And two, if you're going to, presumably in my case, being using abundance to really deck them, because that's, depending on how fast you get your 3 abundance on board, that's 6 cards gone. What, like, the problem has always been you're giving your opponent everything, right? Potentially. It's like when you face against Orc. But I looked at it like, okay, well, there's also a maximum of 10 dice. And thankfully in 2.0 or Reborn 1.5, there's no dice recursion. So the most your opponent can ever do is spend 10 dice. And since there's virtually nothing free, that means 10 cards that they could play, which just ultimately would contribute to your win condition. So I built a Leo deck because I think he's the best at milling, with Finch. And I just went all in with like open with gates. So you get 2 doves, you get 2 abundance plays. I started with Sally, although I'm changing that deck now. And I also started Generosity, so you could get 2 Finches. So you can get 10 mil in round 1. So that only means you really, if meditations help you out a little bit, you only need 2 rounds to fully deck the opponent. And then you start your damage. You basically, with Doves online and Abundance online, you're going to do 9 damage in 1 round. And that deck so far has gone like 4-0. And I was talking with Clue. I think there's something there. And if Brennan does switch to a more control style, so they're slowing down over the top, which is the real downfall of like burn versus mill, then I think there's a potential for mill to start making a resurgence. And that's even before, whatever hopeful new charm-based cards come out in 4 or 5 months from now. If that happens to be the next mono set. So I think it could be interesting to try and make mill decks work against the swing decks or the decks that want to sit back and just heal a bunch. Because once all the options are gone, it's in the mill deck's hand to do all the damage. Like it's not like they're going to be triggering screams all that often. They're not going to be worried about swinging into units and opening themselves up. And between Kneel and Safeguard, and any other either healing or redirect or whatever that you add in, you have a lot of life to sort of play with. So that was my sort of takeaway from the last episode. And so far what I've had some success with. It beat Carl, playing Noah, consequently. That's what made me think of it, is he was playing an aggressive Noah deck, and I played this Leo Turbo Mill and cleaned him out. And so that's what made me think of it. But it'll be interesting to see if anyone else tries to make that work.
So you're the new monk, huh?
I'm not always testing. That was his thing. He's always testing. I've gotten a couple games in, but yeah, I mean, you know me, sticking with an idea for a long period of time.
Definitely, that's your hallmark. Like all of us, I think that probably is the ceiling for the Mill win con. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think you've gotten to very similar places. I think I played against that deck and it was not a very enjoyable experience. I think I lost.
That was actually a mirror mill matchup where you were playing the Soraya Canyon Shelter deck that Waves sort of designed.
Yeah, that Waves designed.
Yeah.
And I think I almost decked you with that too, right? Or I was close.
Yeah.
A couple things about that. So I'm gonna offer a hot take, and it's based on.
Oh, I love it! Finally.
I know. I'm so mild mannered. Never have a hot take. Based on playing Monk a lot, and this reflects my personality and preferred play style. I think Abundance.
I was gonna say bland. No.
Yeah, bland. Abundance. No, Abundance. Way too exciting for me. No, what I was gonna say is I think the challenge, if that is the ceiling of Mill, I think it faces a really significant challenge of then managing its floor, which you've talked about. And I think you run Neil in that deck, yeah?
Yeah, the idea started like 3 Neil, 3 Safeguard, and then what do I do and 3 Abundance, so what do I do from here?
Right, and that's like the classic Monk kind of prison Mill formula, like 3 Neil, 3 Safeguard, Abundance, Orchid Doves. That's what he was running. And I played Monk's decks a lot. I don't know, it was like 18 months ago. I'd play in the morning, sort of like 8-ish my time. And we'd play 2 or 3 days a week, felt like, for a while. And as he was developing those decks. And it took him a while to get to actually the 3x Neil, 3x Safeguard, and then even longer, I think, to really perfect like the timing of Safeguard is so complicated to do it well. And there's a really wide range and skill to how you play Safeguard. But I still think that Abundance, by putting so many cards in your opponent's deck, yes, it does it for the purposes of getting to direct damage. But Mill decks also get you to direct damage just simply by forcing your opponent to draw cards, assuming that their hand is not full of their deck. And I think that's where I think it probably works against a very wide range of decks. I do think, though, that there are lots of decks that, and potentially ways of playing, that create really significant problems for those decks because they tend to be pretty short on removal. And so if you can think about, you're not playing for anything basically until the end of the game. Like when I would play against Monk, basically what I started thinking about is like, I don't care what my board looks like in round 1, round 2, round 3. I care about what my board looks like, whenever I get the top of round swing in round 4, round 5, or whatever. So, counting on the fact that he, at least in his decks, and I don't know what kind of removal suite you're running, would remove very few of my units, I would default to actually generally not playing all 10 of my dice. I'd let him put all my cards into my deck, think about what I was setting up, want to have some bypass, some self-clear, so if there were moments where I felt like I could get swings in, I could reset my board relatively easily after he kneels me, or after I swing, and just accept that I am eventually going to get decked out, and then the game is going to be, can I do, 19, 20 damage or whatever before you can do all of your abundance's worth of damage to me. And I think there actually are a fair number of decks that can do that in a fair number of situations in an endgame scenario, but not. You kind of have to not help your opponent by locking up your deck with low attack units that are going to get kneeled, and then when you finally get your opportunity to swing through, might get killed by the Nature's Wrath or whatever that clears the board and sets up your swing. So,
well, I mean, as an archetype in general, I think there's a lot of room to explore. It was a conversation just before we started recording that I was having with Ninja, because I know Chaos Theory, he's been running a Leo Mill style deck in Phoenix League for every week basically, and just honing it and tuning it, and that's a different style approach where he does have more aggressive threats, which I think help raise the floor. There's obviously the prison deck, like we talked about. I think that, and this is one thing I again mentioned to Ninja, is that ceremonial offers, especially with the new cards, offers a lot to mill, in the sense of Puppeteer being great to help clog and get some of that damage early, and also just waste your opponent's time. I think that it's also 2-for-1, which is important, because typically if you're getting pinged away by any sort of deck, because you're running doves and low cost units, that it's helpful to have 2-for-1s. There's also, again, Old Salt, which is really good. And I also wonder if just running your own healing version. So finding that middle ground of like running a bunch of heal, whether it's Phoenix Attendant and Chant of Transfusion, maybe even in a Jessa deck, and then just really sitting back and trying to grind out the small points of damage before you get to the mill game. Because that's like you said, that's the big thing, right? It's not just 25 cards and then damage. Ideally, you want to lay on something beforehand. So there's things that I'm going to try, but I do think that some of the new cards will help that. And it's just interesting to see that if, particularly the Brennan matchup which is the hard one to counter all that direct damage. If that slows down a little bit, then maybe there's more room for Mill to find its place.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And, I bloviated without actually getting to the point that I was setting up, where I said that abundance is not my style. And the point being, I really like playing Mill, but what I want to do when I'm playing a Mill deck is through a combination of removal and like some amount of mill, so not going all in on the mill plan, actually going heavier on removal, is just make you feel like you've got no options left. Like, I want you to get to the bottom of your deck and you're facing a board of mine that's relatively intact and you haven't been able to make any threat stick. And then that's the moment where I want to grind out the game, and I want my opponent to start meditating their spell board to, figure out how to get anything done. And ideally I want to do that with my opponent at like 8 health or 6, 9 health, where I've done some swing damage over the course of the game or some burn damage to get them there. That's what, when I play Leo, that's kind of the end state that I'm looking for, that turns Anguish online in a major way, because then you don't want to give up your last couple cards and you're facing horrible choices between getting yourself slightly closer to death and losing one of the few cards you were counting on to try and create a win con, or the few dice you have left. So that kind of constriction mill is, with offensive threats and a fair bit of removal, is definitely more of what I prefer to play when I play mill.
And I think that particular style is going to be even better where, if there happen to be more decks that start running a lot of allies, for the purpose of triggering Chant of Transfusion or multiple chants, like, some of the decks I've seen being posted or being played are starting to creep up to that 14 or more allies. And so if they're doing that on top of fitting in, utility spells, which means that they don't have conjurations to hang in there at the end of the game when their deck is out, that type of constriction deck could be really powerful.
I mean, the one deck I've been running lately, or thinking about, I've run it once or twice maybe, is going back to Body Inversion and Saria, which was something I was playing way back when Three-Eyed Owl hadn't been chained yet. And I think Body Inversion gets a really juicy new target in Phoenix Attendant. Like, yeah, please wound your one attack unit so I can just body invert it into oblivion. And I think there's, that deck also takes some of the ideas that Matt Bowers has been developing in a bunch of his time, charm, illusion decks that he's been running. So I think, yeah, I agree. I think any slowing down of the meta naturally should cause you to think about whether you have a mill deck that you'd like to try and pull out.
For sure. Yeah. There was, before we get to finally the Vicky decks, there was one more.
Not going to happen.
We'll just drag out the next topic for another half hour and then. All right. There was an interesting question that was brought up. I think it was by Ninja, and it was asking if there is a Phoenixborn ability, like potential with existing cards and new cards, and how some of those abilities, I like multiply effects. I'm not exactly sure what he intended, but I have my own sort of interpretation of that, and how some are more flat, mathematically speaking, and which Phoenixborn could potentially be amazing in the future based off of new cards that come along. And so I want to know from you what your idea is of like a Phoenixborn that could benefit seriously from new cards and what those cards actually look like.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I thought about this in the context of just one very particular Phoenixborn. I will totally admit this. I think it's an interesting question. I'll just say here how I'm interpreting the kind of linear versus non-linear thing. I'm just going to interpret it in the context of synergy, sort of that large equally nebulous concept, but at least it's a nebulous concept that maybe other people have thought about in a somewhat nebulous or even less nebulous way. So I've thought about it in the context of Symbali, and specifically feeling like right now her ability really locks her into getting a fair bit of value from knights, mostly. So her Gift of Wings, 2 dice to side action, make something unguardable, and make an ally unguardable, and remove an exhaustion token from it, or actually I believe it's all exhaustion. I think that pushes you towards a fairly tall plan. We saw in Crystal Archer, and maybe Crystal Archer's day is coming at some point, but I'm not sure. A mid-range ally, like 2 health, 2 cost, with a really nice when it's declared an attacker effect. And what I've thought about is, I think it was really challenged at 2 health by being released alongside Cloudburst Griffin, which helped contribute to the ubiquity of Ice Trap, which just immediately destroys a 2 health unit as a reaction. And 2 health is just not very robust. But it made me think about how nice it would be if Symbali had 1 or 2 more mid-rangey allies with interesting on-attack effects, or even, when they destroy a unit effects that would enable her to get more value, have more targets essentially for her Gift of Wings than like 1 knight. So just shifting from, okay, I'm going to have this 1 threat, and given that I just got dumpstered by a Symbali Hunting Weapons Realm Walker deck a couple days ago, that I did none of the things I know I should do against that deck when faced with it. I think it was pretty close to the deck I ran in Shuffle Bust, to be honest, which makes it even more embarrassing that I saw it and sort of locked up and was like, I don't have any answers for this. But like, one of the answers for that deck is just run double removal, because you're going to remove the only threat that they can offer. I think it's more interesting if you can start to stack, 2 or 3 2-cost allies in your battlefield and start to ask a lot of questions of your opponent about which one they want to try and how they're going to try and prevent you from getting your Gift of Wings off with value. And it starts to move her closer to the direction of some of the Demona decks that, run a bunch of allies that can exhaust. I think those decks have struggled too. And it may be that there's no saving Symbali, like that being ally locked. It's so telegraphed what you're trying to do that your opponent is always going to be able to focus you down, and to run enough density of allies pulls you off of the density of books you would need to have round over round consistency. Like, these are real questions to ask about her, but I still think that more mid-range allies would be helpful. And I think Waves actually has pointed out in some of his decks, and I've run some of this a little bit in Symboli, and it's really fun getting back to the mill point. Imperial Ninja is like one of those allies that could be really cool in Symboli. One other thing that the two cost allies gives you, just to finish this thought, is there's so many interesting alterations now, and I think I'm excited for more alterations to come out, that you can basically, design your own knight, with, yes, 2 cards, but which is frustrating, but in later rounds, you may be able to cheat the alterations with Polarity Mage or whatever. But you still potentially have flexibility, whether it's hunting weapons or root armor. I hope we get more alterations in the future. So what I'm looking for Symboli is 2 cost allies that are worth playing Gift of Wings on, especially 2 cost allies with 3 health, and interesting alterations to stack on them.
Right, yeah. No, so Symboli's, I think, a really interesting case when I look at or try and consider the idea of multiplying the effect. And I think that's the reason that Realmwalker plus hunting weapons is so successful, because up until that point, there had been no, obviously there had been good allies, but there was nothing in the case of wanting to spend 2 dice to refresh a single unit that, before Realmwalker, it was really Sonic probably, or Hammer Knight, which would be the units that you would have a conditional effect that required them killing something. So it required, pulling guard first, keeping the knight alive, then triggering a new attack, and you're only getting the benefit maybe once.
You don't have to pull guard, just to note, because Gift of Wings makes them unguardable. But yes, you still have to keep them alive.
I meant the first time, to actually get.
Yeah, for sure.
I forget what Sonic's Aftershock is. Hammer Knights.
Sonic Pulse, I think.
Yeah, so to get Sonic Pulse, to actually trigger it twice, you almost always had to have already pulled guard, or you're trying to force guard the first time and then using Gift of Wings. And then Rimwalker came along, and it was like, well, that's already amazing because it's an on-attack effect. So you're getting 2 exhaustions. You're isolating 2 defenders and removing them from the round with a reswing. And then hunting weapons on top of that was like, well, now I'm potentially removing 4 blockers or 4 units on 2 swings. And that to me is the idea of multiplying the value of the effect of the dice. So all of a sudden, Gift of Wings for 2 dice all of a sudden became, and if you include the Realmwalker cost, but it basically became another 2 removal for 2 dice, which is pretty good. And
4 damage to face.
So it's really that's why it's so successful. And it's really then just about covering your bases and raising the floor, or really trying to go all in, like some of Clue's decks. So that's one example, which is great. Crystal Archer, I do think, is interesting. And, traditionally to date, the problem has been that 2 life units have suffered in the recent meta because of the ubiquity of 1 cost 2 attack units. But then other Phoenixborn that have had their effects multiplied recently. Obviously, Hope sort of did it in and of themselves, because you're multiplying the value of something like Creepers. You're getting up to 4 units out of a single basic die for duplicating. Which is huge. A 1 to 4 is a big deal. And then, we're going to be talking about her, but Victoria, she always had the problem of surprise is basically useless outside of any sort of spin down plan. And then Keepsake came along, and it's like, okay, well, now for 1 illusion class, I basically have a night killer on the board. The problem being that the meta had completely shifted away from knights, and so it sort of became dead. But at least that's an example that I can think of, multiplying the effect of the ability to being something that's worth it. And it'll be interesting to see if a return to knights sort of gives Vicky some more value. And then
that's interesting.
There's always been some smaller, simpler synergies. Like you said, ultimately it's about the synergy and the value of that synergy, whether it's flat or exponential. So Echo and Gravity Flux with False Demon is traditionally a one removal, and it's a really good removal in the Sally Snapper days because Snapper's effect is exhaustible. So that is useful, but it's not huge. It's just it's sort of like a free for one die, but you're also having to play False Demon. So okay, whatever. Brennan, obviously has always been, I've talked about this many times, but for like 2 dice, you're getting Spirit Burn. Let's say it's Fire Archer. You're getting one burn, then you're getting Spirit Burn, which is another 2. You can trigger Final Cry, which is another 2. Like it just amplifies the burn so much, which has become a problem in my books. And then all the sort of lower Phoenixborn, the ones that we always talk about not being good, are all ones where the synergy is super weak with any cards, and that there isn't the ability to really multiply the value of either the Phoenixborn ability or their loyalty card to any extent, like Astria, right? Or Ramia or Fiona. There's not really that explosive, like I can play this one card and everything gets super buffed.
Yep.
So it's really interesting as a question, and I don't know what type of card specifically would bump any of those Phoenixborn specifically. Because I think they have other problems too.
Yeah, I feel like I haven't played a lot of those enough. Like Ramea, I've hardly ever played. But I do think maybe it's worth just breaking down, or at least putting 2 buckets around this. Like, I think if you want to look for nonlinear effects, like Hunting Weapons and Realm Walker gave Symbolic access to one form of nonlinear effect, which is, this compounding value that basically creates a kind of exponential curve in impact, because you're able to stack triggers, you're able to create just a really difficult problem for your opponent to solve. The kind of classic idea of synergy, where each card's effect compounds so that you're getting, Hunting Weapons is doing a lot more when you're effectively pairing it to help you pick which defender or which unit Symbolic is exhausting, because you can't just put another 1 health unit out there. There's another kind of synergy, so that's one, where the value of each card when paired with another card goes up substantially, kind of in an exponential way. There's another nonlinear effect, which I think you could think about as the effect of forking, or just diversifying threats, or forcing your opponent into a situation where they can't respond to everything you're putting down. And that's where I was going with Symbolic, because obviously Hunting Weapons, Realm Walker, you're really you're further concentrating value, and yes, you're getting more than, I would argue, the 4 dice you invest in it if your opponent can't answer it, worth of value from that unit, substantially more. But you are really concentrating your risk. So in the floor ceiling, I think this was my example of like a high floor, low ceiling deck. I would like Symbolic to have more diversification, availability of forks, ways to force your opponent to pick between 2 bad options for them.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's another source of nonlinear effects, and it's another way in which 2 cards produce more value than either of them has independently, because it forces your opponent into suboptimal play lines, or to pick a bad option. So, in any case, I think that diversification is another source of value.
Yeah, because, I mean, just, thinking about all the we're trying to think through the Phoenixborn. Rowan is an example that just came in and immediately, multiplied the value that you get out of Rising Horde, right? Like, it wasn't like a new card that came in with Rowan. It was just Rowan came in, and all of a sudden Rising Horde was, like, do I want to spend 2 dice? Like, it's okay, if I'm going to play a Fallen deck, but otherwise it was rarely seen. And then all of a sudden now it's like, oh, well, yeah, sure, for 3 dice, I can get 5 units on the board. That's a big deal. And obviously the more Phoenixborn, or rather, the more cards come out that synergize with too many Phoenixborn, the more dangerous it can be. Just because, you have this sort of potential for infinite combos, or the, not infinite in the sense of like repeating, but just the number of combinations is so vast that it becomes very difficult to catch everything, and the rich can get richer. And so, you have an example like Victoria, where Keepsake is basically her new unique, and you don't really see it elsewhere, but at the same time, it hasn't elevated her all of that much. And then, there are other cards that are starting to see some more experimentation, like Canyon Shelter. And that's a card that I think is probably more linear for a lot of Phoenixborn, but when it comes to at least 3 specific synergies, I think the effect is much greater. So one being Raven, right, where any card that you're paying, let's say 3 dice for, and you're getting 2 uses out of it, so for 1 more die, is big. So the Raven is great for Canyon Shelter. Or Canyon Shelter is great for Raven because it's an ice trap and a refresh on a unit that also has quick strike, and it's also helping Soraya's board clog issue. Similarly, for Ramia, getting potentially 6 units on the board for 4 dice is really good by slotting in the Ancestral Army. And then Huntmaster, which is another just, value town type of thing. And I guess similarly, Jericho's Blink helps do that. For 1 die, you can get a lot of extra value, depending on some units. So I don't know, to answer Ninja's question, like which card could come out to really multiply an existing Phoenixborn, and I don't know which one I would want it to do, much less what that card looks like. But I did think that the question of like evaluating how some cards multiply the effects and why, I think, Carl comes up with his here's the top 10 list of cards that are effectively uniques for Phoenixborn. I think it's with that idea in mind. That some cards are just, the synergy is so strong that there's very little reason not to run it. Ember Root Lizard and Lulu tends to be a similar topic. Although I think that value is much more.
I never run Ember Root and Lulu, so
I'm just saying, like, it's an example, and I think that's much more linear because
the book tax eats all the synergy.
If there was no tax, then really for 2 dice, getting a 3 attack 2 life unit is really good, but the tax eats into it a little bit. But still, I mean, it's still valuable, and it's still a card that is good. It's just like, there's what else is out there that could be created to have that exponential effect of like, I'm paying 1 or 2 dice, but I'm getting 4 or 5 dice worth of value out of it. Speaking of trying to multiply the effect of an ability, we have Vicky decks, which
impossible to multiply the effect of that. Anything times 0 is still 0. Can you tell that I didn't submit a Vicky deck?
I didn't because if I recall, Shadow. Oh no, that was he stole the idea for the next one. I've played around with Vicky enough, and I don't know that I have any good deck.
And life is short, and you prefer joy.
I just think that I'm not gonna be bringing anything world shattering to the fold. So I'd rather talk about someone else's idea and dunk on it instead of talking about my own bad ideas. So let's jump into it. We've got 1, 2, 3. We've got 6 submissions. So we're gonna start with the
Hold
one.
on, I have a proposal.
Okay, all right, let's hear it.
My proposal is that we don't talk about all 6.
Okay.
But we each talk about a few that we would actually consider playing.
Do you mean like talk in depth?
Or forcing Killercactus. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't want to talk in depth about every deck. That's fine.
So, all right, why don't you run through them and tell us just the options at a high level?
Sure, yeah. And then we're going to do the Mary... what'd you call it?
Fork, Marry, Killercactus. So pick a deck that you would use, but with some changes, like forking it. Pick a deck you'd play regularly, marry it, and pick a deck you'd make Killercactus play because you enjoy watching him suffer.
Sure. Okay. All right. So we'll do a high level overview of each deck, and then we'll dive into that game. So first off, starting with the imitable Matt Bowers, he provided his deck Jankyard Dog. It's a Charm Illusion Sympathy split with Dream Fracture, Keepsake, Cobra, Salamander Monk, and Shadow Spirit. So basically going for the mill spin down, which is sensible and I expect to see a lot of. Then we have Shadowfire's Shadowfire deck. Actually, sorry, he did not call this just a Victoria deck. He called this the Reinforce and Reimagine Victoria. So his name convention has changed, which suggests that this is truly something to behold. We'll see. It is an illusion, sympathy, and time deck. And he's running 1 reimagine, 1 reinforce, summon Misspirits, and Turtle Guard. And so that's interesting. So he did not go with mill or spin down. Okay, I'm going to have to take a look at the rest of the cards later. We've got our very own Absentees deck, Killercactus. His is called Yeet and Spin. And this is an illusion sympathy deck primarily with a single splash of time and divine. And it's 3 fractures, 3 keepsake, 3 magic siphon, Misspirits, and Sally. Then we've got Waves, who I don't know if he's trolling us, decided to go off the deep end or what, but he went with Dread Wraiths before the new cards came out. This is 3 Dark Presence, 3 Keepsake, 3 Small Sack, Dread Wraith, and Sally. Okay, so that is probably kill, just as a high-level thought. And then we've got Just Cam. And now for something completely random, this is a 1, 2, 3, 5 dice spread. He's got Strengthen because it's Cam, and you can't have a deck without Strengthen. False Demon, Frostback Bear, Lightbringer, Sally, and Shadow Spirit. Oh god, I see what he's done in this deck. Okay, that'll be fun. That's funny. He's basically done one of everything, just so that you can copycat anything your opponent throws at you. Okay, I like this. And then we've got the last deck by Clue called It's Not Nothing. And it is primarily a time sympathy deck with a splash of charm and 2 illusion. And it's got 2 dream fractures, 2 secret doors. Okay. Some mind fog owls, or a mind fog owl, tidal crab, and 3 wishing wing. So where do you want to start? Because I'm pleasantly surprised that they're quite different.
Yeah, they are quite different. So I'm going to start with a deck that I'm going to fork.
Okay.
Or change. And it's Matt's Jankyard Dog deck. So, and I'm going to make one particular change, which is that
Phoenixborn.
yeah, I'm going to move it over to Saria. No. I'm going to cut the Radiant Leviathan. I love that this deck has a one summon Radiant Leviathan that it cannot play except via Copycat.
Yeah.
I don't know if Matt put it in here because he knows how much I like Radiant Leviathan. I don't know. As much as I like Whale, I don't think it's had the meta impact that would justify it being run as a one of in the off chance that you get to Copycat it from your opponent. So I think I would cut that card. I really like a lot of other things in this deck. Just to name some of them, I like that it's running just one Keepsake and 3 Essence Druids. I think that's far preferable to me than running multiple Keepsakes. Like, there's some matchups where it's just not that great, and so I don't really want to run 3 of it. And if I don't need to recur it, I can pull my Dream Fractures back because it's running 3x Dream Fractures. So I like that a lot. I like that it's got the healthy complement of Knights. I think in a 5 battlefield deck, that's a useful thing to have. And I like the spin down pressure in general. So yeah, I like this deck. I don't even know what you would do with, I guess you'd get the Leviathan, but you better hope to God it doesn't come with
die.
any tokens on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a good question. When you Copycat, would the Leviathan, it would come into play with tokens from your field, right? You're not copying the tokens that are generated
I think so, yeah.
by, yeah. Either way, yeah, I agree with the fork because aside from the Leviathan, I mean, I'd probably make maybe like a couple changes. I'm not sure what you do with 3 Essence Druid other than the Keepsake. And if you are running some of these Knights on top of 3 Conjurations, I would just prefer to have a couple Seeds of Aggression in here.
Yeah, I like that.
It's going to help against either, like, if you really need it, self-clear, but also help for more removal that cannot be countered.
It's a great call.
So that would be my preference. I'm always very cautious of 2 power class books, but because he's running 4/4/2, I think it's probably safe. So yeah, this is a cool deck. Shout out to Matt Bowers. All right, let's hop over to, let's just go through the list again, but we'll just say whether it's Mary Fork Kill. So we're on Shadowfire's deck.
None of the above for me.
You have to pick one of the 3 options.
No, I was just gonna pick 3 decks to talk about.
Oh, okay, okay.
I wouldn't. Yeah.
You're not gonna touch it. No.
No, I don't. Shadowfire has lots of great stuff. This seems totally competent.
So it's reaction heavy with 8 reactions. He's got 11 allies, one-ofs of a lot of things. A couple Knights, whatever. It doesn't feel particularly cohesive to me, like in terms of a win condition. So yeah, I'm cool with passing. I mean, honestly, it's not like it's probably not going to be a decent deck. I just don't know that Victoria is bringing anything to it. And actually, he doesn't even run Copycat. Yeah. Okay. Nice try, Shadow. Trying to pull one over on us. All right. All right. So Killer's deck. This is just heavy spin down with the 3 Keepsakes. Oh, and it's part of the Yeet is also the 3 River Scalds in there.
Yep, 3 River Skulls. I like to think of Seeds of Aggression as yeeting. He's got 2 but he can actually play the Leviathan, unlike without a copycat. Like, you literally can't play Leviathan.
I don't think he does though.
That,
right? I think that's for the 4 damage from a Scald.
Oh, I'm sure he doesn't actually play it. Yeah. But he could. He's got the time die. Yeah. Whereas Matt didn't. So yeah, I didn't this one didn't rate for me. This didn't make my 3 decks.
Okay. Well, I have a feeling I know what's going to come up. I think this, again, it's like, I think this is actually a pretty cool deck. It's got the cheap stuff to, just to sort of spam some units while you get your spin engine going with the Mist Spirits and the Sally. And then it's got a lot of hard removal. It's got 3 Seeds of Aggression. It's got the keepsakes and everything, which most likely are going to blast something. And 3 title shifts. So I don't know all the other lists that well, but I think this is actually something I would play. Like, I would try this quite a bit. So maybe this is my Mary deck.
Yeah. Okay.
So then we get to Wave's Let's Wraith deck.
Yep.
What is going? So he even has a description. So just quickly, if they remove your Dread Wraiths, you copy them and you remove their knights. Start with Ironworker to collect all the cards, and then you're looking for combos of Dark Presence with a full Wraith, Crescendo the Wraith for 5 damage, swing into face. So that's the plan.
Yeah, so this is the deck I said I would marry. This is the... Do you hear those wedding bells in the distance? That's me marrying this deck. Specifically, what sold me.
Okay.
Because I marry for love and not for lust is this Crescendo. This Crescendo jank. I didn't know that Crescendo could target your own unit. And now all I want to do is, like... Crescendo stuff that belongs to me. But I really like the idea of crescendoing a Dread Wraith with Dark Presence. I think that's really cool. I like the idea of, like, just dangling bait out there for your opponent to, use hard removal on, and then copycatting them if you can. So I think this is pretty cool. I think I doubt it works, but then again, I don't really have high expectations for any Vicky deck. So, and I did just say that I don't like the idea of running 3 Keepsake, but here we are. But in any case, I think this is cool. It also has Small Sack and String Mage, so, like, come on, how could you go wrong?
Yeah, no, I know. Okay, so here, God, now I'm supporting this idea. So Here's the thought. All right, okay, we didn't talk about this.
Are we a thruple?
Yeah, we're a thruple. We didn't talk about Serve the City when we were covering the new cards, but like there's a few things. One is that
yes, Serve the City, crescendo your own dark. Yes, I love
exactly. Yes, Serve the City, Dread Wraith, and then you can crescendo. Yeah, it's so stupid. It's so stupid, but it could just work. I mean, it's a big punch. Oh God, what do I have to support this deck now? And you Serve the City. Serve the City in this case would be better than Small Sack, at least for the Dread Wraith trick. And you can also still do it with String Mage for free, for 1 free ping instead of 2.
Yeah, and I think it's good.
Oh God, I'm dropping Matt Bauer's deck to say this is my fork deck. No, can it be fork and kill? Can I make Killercactus play this, but just he could update it with a couple new cards?
It's pretty dark treatment, but yeah, if you want, I guess. Yeah, I think Serve the City is interesting because Battleseer and Master Vampire are actually 2 other pretty cool Serve the City targets. Battleseer threatens to remove their knight. And probably an excellent way to pull guard for 4 damage, and Master Vampire, flexes up again to threaten knights. So, although Master Vampire is more of a straight up trade,
the Stalking and Quick Strike, those will almost always pull guard. Like, I mean, if not, then you're just trading up, which is great.
Well, Stock can't pull guard. But yeah,
takes care of the attendant as well, because we were talking about for life.
Sure.
So there you go. All right, he convinced me. Waves, you get a feather in your cap there. Just Cam's deck. So I briefly mentioned it, but he's got just one of everything, except for 3 Copycat. That's the only card that he has multiple of, and it's got 12 allies. Every single night, I think he played Battleseer, Beast. Beast Warrior, not Beast Mage. Celestial, Grave Knight, Hammer Knight, Master Vampire. It's one of 5 action spells, including Archosaurus Mount and Shining Hydra. Again, just to copy them, because why not? And yeah, part of his deck description, ever wanted to just confuse your opponent in an open deck format? Well, here's a completely random deck to have fun with. Who knows what you'll play next?
Yeah. So this is the one I would assign to Killercactus to bring to the pod tournament. Both because I'd like to just watch what he comes up with, and because I know I couldn't probably do anything of use with this deck, but I think Killer could probably figure out some interesting first 5s in an open list tournament. Like, I think he could actually do something. This is one where I do think you might want to run the Leviathan. I mean, like, if you're going to go all in on the copycatting large surprise conjurations, might as well throw a whale in here. But
and you might as well put a Calamity Golem in there.
I mean, just the math of figuring out what first 5s are even possible to you. I mean, it's a good thing the chess clock doesn't start until you pick your first 5, because it would take me a good 25 minutes to figure out whether I could even run a first 5 in a given match.
Dijon broke the chess clock anyway, so you know what? You can't use it right now.
Oh, good. This is
like a Calco melee deck. Like, when he would run his James and it had 15 one-ofs, and I was just like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what to do. That's what this reminds me of. But yeah, hilarious. Okay, that's pretty cool. And then we've got Clue's deck, which is all about the bypass. So he provides a description. I wanted to see if Secret Door was a thing. I picked Victoria to keep folks off of easy frog pings. Makes sense. And the deck has a shocking win percentage of 60%. Sneaks damage in across the board with Ensnare, Flash Strikes, Dream Fractures, and all the bypass between 2 Realm Walkers, Mindfog Owl, and Secret Door, and Wave Crash. I mean, it's very cool in terms of the amount of bypass it has. I have like serious aversion to playing any deck that has fewer than like 5 allies. There's just something that makes me deeply uncomfortable about the number of units that you potentially have to output round over round.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is 2 more units than when I first got to know Clue. He was running Vicky decks with no units at all, not even books. So, you know, it's a step in the right direction for his Vicky decks. But yeah, I think this is pretty. I'm not shocked. I guess I'm shocked that the deck has that win percentage, but not given that Clue's playing it, since he's a great player and he can make lots of things perform, I imagine. But, you know, my quibbles with it would be, yeah, the density of units seems low, with just 2 Realm Walkers as allies, and in that context, like, I can't see myself ever wanting to seeds one of my units away, given how few of them I have. And I think the Secret Door is, like, only being 2 of, like, if that's the thing I want to do, but I'm not going to first 5 it, because it's not in his recommended first 5, which I think is correct, then I really want to draw into it. I know the Wishing Wind provides additional draw, but I still feel like, I don't know. Then again, the idea of running 3 Secret Doors when you don't have enough units is kind of scary to me.
Yeah, and, you know, I just think if you're I don't know if I'm thinking of Secret Door on a Wishing Wing. He only has one Golden Veil. He's got 2 Particle Shields. So Charlotte, listen up. But like, there's not a lot of protection, and then there's no, like, I would have expected like explosive growth, to try and get that one big punch through. I don't, man, this is the type of deck though. It feels like, if I saw this list, I'd be like, really? Does this actually work? And then, much like a Red King deck, and then just get completely stomped by it. And just demolished and have my ego drop to the floor because I'm playing some deck with just a pile of good stuff, and it just gets run over by this. So, but it's not on my 3. It's not my Mary Fork kill or Killercactus. But it is interesting, and it's interesting that it has a win percentage associated.
Above 50.
Above 50. Yeah. All right. So let's recap. So your Mary deck is which one?
Let's Wraith.
Let's Wraith. Okay. And mine is
I don't know, man.
I don't think I picked a Mary deck, actually. I picked the Fork deck. We both picked as Matt Bowers. We both passed on Shadows.
I thought you liked Killers. I thought Killers.
I like Killers, yeah.
And Spin was you.
Yeah, that was it. I would marry that one.
Very incestuous of you.
And then I would make...
He's on the podcast, man.
I would make Killer play the Wraith deck. And you would make him play the something completely random. Yeah. Okay.
Good.
So we finally did it.
We did it. We covered Vicky. We don't ever have to talk to her again until Red Rain's Illusion comes out. Hopefully in, like 2 years when we've quit the podcast.
I mean, we're not going to cover it this time, but it's not like our next list is going to be all that hopeful with Weeping Spirits.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how to make a Weeping Spirit deck either. So
all I know is that I mean, maybe this goes to show how close Shadow and I think a lot of times, but I was just going to submit our Campfire deck, and the bastard did the exact same thing, but he did change the name of it to just be like a Mayoni deck or whatever, or a Weeping Spirit deck. I was like, wait a second, that's the one we created together. It's like, now what am I going to do? I don't have any idea for it.
Could you puppeteer Blood Puppet, Weeping Spirit, Gates, and Tidal Shift?
So
could you do all that?
So you play no units of your own and try and...
No, you've got the Puppeteer.
Yeah, I guess. But you have one unit.
You got that 1/1 holding down the fort. But you put 6 units onto your opponents.
I mean, as long as you're not facing Aradel or Tristan or Koji, I guess. No, 6. No, because if you face James or Noah, then you're still screwed. I don't know, man. I want to see it, though.
No, thanks. I should probably participate in these deck challenges.
That's what I'm going to say.
Man,
you're now required.
It turns out there's a level of jank that even I find distasteful.
Weeping Spirit is that line?
Yeah, because I think Vicky's actually below Weeping Spirit. So Weeping Spirit starts the line, and then Vicky's a little bit lower.
I'm not that down. Well, I mean, I'm down on Vicky-ish, but not that low.
Fair. Weeping Spirit's pretty tough to play.
I think we have a lot on our wheel that would just be a struggle to even think of like 3 cards that could synergize.
I think the trouble with Here's the trouble with Weeping Spirit. Like, there are other, like, I would pick basically any of the janky utility ready spells before I picked Weeping Spirit. Like, we had fun with Drain Vitality. Like, I think Confusion Spores is interesting. I made a fun Confusion Spores deck in Demona.
Strange Copy was my favorite so far.
Strange Copy was really fun as a reaction. But I'm just saying, like, Weeping Spirit's like, at least with a utility ready spell, at worst, it's just a spellboard slot. You don't even have to really, you could like just not first 5 it. Like, and there are at least some matchups where it's good. Like, figuring out, and they almost all have synergy that you can find because by their nature they have to do something with something else. Weeping Spirit's like, what am I supposed to do?
Well, Killer
came up with a really cool Weeping Spirit deck, so
yeah,
he can talk about his, and we can all worship at the altar.
It's tough. Like I said, I mean, my only thought so far, but I will make an effort to do a fresh idea for the next episode for, a submission. Was just Weeping Spirit with Mayoni, because it's the type of deck that you want to sit back. You want some way of generating more tokens on Snake, and you ultimately want to enable yourself some bypass. And so we turned it into a middle-ish Mayoni with big hits. And I think it works really, it worked well there during the, few games that I played with it. But otherwise it's a tough sell.
Well, we've done it, Treatment. We've gone almost 2 hours, just the two of us, which God help you if you've listened this long. I mean, really, find another hobby.
Jesus.
At this point.
No faith in our listeners. Wow. Some of them have long road trips.
Well, we haven't talked about particle shields for 90 minutes, so she probably pieced out a while ago.
That's true.
For good reason.
It was part of my plan to just keep bringing it up like on a timer every 10 minutes as a wake-up call, but oh well.
I don't think any of those Vicky decks had particle shield. Big missed opportunity.
No, they did.
All right,
what are you talking about?
On. Oh, did they?
Just Cams did, Clues did, and then Matt's also. Oof, man. The Dojo Master himself did not include the requisite 2 particle shields. Epic fail.
All right. See you all in a couple weeks. Once again without Killer, but we may reach out to the community to see if folks can join us, have some special guests.
Yeah, it would be really cool. So if you are still listening and you want to be a guest, then please reach out to us. I think, I mean, one of the topics that someone offered up was, how do you become a better player? And that is not a topic that either of us should be speaking on. So maybe we get lucky and we get one of the big, the big guns to
turn
come
this
out.
Podcast off an hour and a half ago. That's rule number 1. How to be a better player.
You could have spent that hour and a half playing a game of Ashes. Play and get better that way. Yeah. Anyway, you want to do the sign off?
If you're not janky, you're stanky.
Have a good one, everyone.
I can't believe we're stuck with that. All right.
It's worth it, I think.
All right.
Yeah. See ya.
Bye.